We can be live to the world. All right, so welcome everyone to the March 1st meeting of Heritage Kitchener. We have a pretty full agenda today, so we will get started. I do want to begin by congratulating Jean on behalf of the committee. So recently, Jean was awarded the Ontario Heritage Award for Lifetime Achievement from the Lieutenant Governor of Ontario and the Ontario Heritage Trust. So congratulations, Jean, and thank you for your support of this committee in its many forms, both as Heritage Kitchener and when it existed by other names, and your contributions to heritage conservation in the province. So congratulations and thank you to Jean.
Thank you. I really appreciate the support, and I have to say in my long years of work, I won't say work, it's community building, and really without supporters and working together, the projects won't get accomplished. So I've been very fortunate for support from, as I said last night, the councillors, mayors, staff members, and the residents and people such as yourself and the committee members. So thanks a lot.
Thanks, Jean. We're looking forward to many more years of community building with you.
Okay.
All right, we'll move on to our discussion items so that we can continue that community building and heritage work. Our first discussion item today is the draft heritage impact assessment for 22 Weber Street West on the proposed development of constructing a 19-story multiple residential building. And the number for this is DSD 2022093. And committee members, you should have received a number of written submissions for this discussion item. And I apologize to anyone whose names I mispronounce here, but we have written submissions from Catherine Forler, Neil Barda, and Elizabeth Taylor, Lori Reiser, Peter Nikiforek, Neil Jensen, T. Wagner, Andrew Milne, Kate Dingle, Roy Cameron, the ACO North Waterloo Region Branch, and Bob Martindale on behalf of the Friends of Old Berlin Town. So a lot of reading for this one. And before we get to our discussion, Deeksha is going to provide a brief overview for us. So I will pass it over to Deeksha for her first overview for our committees. Off to you, Deeksha.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So yes, as Sam mentioned, we're in receipt of a draft HIA for 22 Weber Street West. Currently, the subject property is a surface parking lot, and it's located within the Civic Center Neighborhood Heritage Conservation District, so it's designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act. There is a proposal for a 19-story multiple residential building on this particular address, and the subject plans are subject to an OP and a ZB, which is currently under appeal at the Ontario Land Tribunal. Heritage planning staff at this point are seeking input from the committee regarding this application and any related planning applications to this subject property. We have the heritage consultants with here in case there are any questions you might like to ask them.
Great, thanks, Deeksha. And I do not believe that MHVC, so Dan, that you have a presentation for us today. Oh, you're muted still for Dan.
Thank you. Sorry. You'd think after 2 years of doing this, I'd know to touch mute. It's at your discretion, Chair. I'm here to assist with any questions. I have a short presentation I could bring up if that's useful to you and the committee. But given the situation where we're at, I'm happy to do either.
Okay, well, we do have a number of delegations that do have presentations. So why don't we go to the delegations and then we will come back to discussion. Committee, if any of you would like to hear from Dan and his team, please just let me know and we can provide them the opportunity to do that presentation. Otherwise, they are here for questions that we have during our discussion time. Okay, so we'll begin with our delegations then. So delegations, I'm going to remind you that you have 5 minutes for your presentations. And because we have so many delegations, I am going to hold you very strictly to that 5 minutes. So I will give you a visual warning. I'll put my hand up when you have 1 minute left, and then I will unmute to let you know when your 5 minutes are up. Okay. All right. So our first delegation is from Marg Rowell from ACO North Waterloo Region Branch. And I believe Sarah has Marg joining us on this side of the Zoom call. So Marg, your 5 minutes will begin when you unmute.
Good afternoon, members of Heritage Kitchener and staff. I'm Marg Rowell of the Architectural Conservancy of Ontario. This presentation was prepared by Mr. Gail Poole. The ACO North Waterloo Region Branch has been involved in heritage preservation since the branch was founded in 1980. Our organization encourages the conservation and reuse of structures, districts, and landscapes of architectural, historical, and cultural significance. Members of our current executive have been involved in on many occasions when heritage is deemed to be at risk and have sat on committees when heritage districts were identified and established under bylaws in the different municipalities in our region. In short, we have significant expertise in the municipal, regional, and provincial guidelines governing heritage conservation. Next slide, please. Heritage district plans are valid municipal bylaws like zoning or other bylaws. Each plan has different guidelines, but each plan must state definite objectives, identify heritage values, and procedures for managing change. The designation of the Civic Center neighborhood was created for a number of reasons. Not only is Civic Center one of the oldest heritage areas, it has a high proportion of heritage buildings. Weber Street has about half of the oldest buildings in the Heritage District. Next slide, please. Yet 2 buildings along Weber, one of which belonged to a well-known sheriff and newspaper owner, and another building next to it, which is not found elsewhere in the Heritage District, are to be demolished to make way for a new development at Yonge and Weber. 54 to 56 Weber was built. That's the house on the left. Was built by John Motz, editor and owner of the Berliner Journal, and later sheriff and mayor of Berlin. But the main reason for our opposition to this development is the question of whether such a building is appropriate in any heritage conservation district. More important are the Civic Center specific guidelines as to what is compatible. And the next slide. Fortunately, the CCHCD plan is very specific on what constitutes compatible building form. The next slide. The plan states one of the goals is to provide design guidelines to ensure new development and alterations are sensitive to the heritage attributes and details of the district. Whatever the zoning regulations might be, it is clear that this development is not compatible with the surrounding buildings. Next slide. Infill along Weber would have a negative impact on the heritage character of the area if not undertaken in a sensitive manner, because Weber contains nearly half of the oldest buildings in the district. Even more care in compatible developments must be taken. Will this be done at 22 Weber? The next slide, please. Properties on either side of 22 Weber are low-rise, and there are 2 churches in adjoining properties on either side of this space. The new building should be no higher than the eaves of the roof of the churches. In short, the 19-story building is totally out of scale with the neighborhood. Next slide, please. To summarize, if heritage districts are to be useful in the planning process, then the guidelines for their conservation must be observed as follows. Maintain the residential streetscape with respect to height, massing, built form and materials, setbacks, footprints, size and massing patterns, and the use of materials, colors, and traditional details that represent the texture and palette of the heritage district. It is clear that the proposed development meets none of these guidelines. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Mark. Our next delegation is Andrew Milne.
Through the chair, if I may.
Yes.
I apologize. I just wanted to apologize to Marg quickly for the stuttering in her slides. I had a small technical issue on my end. And I did just want to mention the opportunity for any questions from the committee before we move on.
Yes, great point. Thank you, Sarah. Are there any questions for Marg on their presentation? Excellent. Well, seeing none, thank you very much, Marg, for your presentation. Now we will move on to Andrew Milne. We'll give Sarah a moment to switch everyone over here. All right, so Andrew, you will have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the time to speak. I want to make it clear that I'm speaking as a private citizen today. I'm not speaking in any professional capacity. I am a resident of this neighborhood. I live on Ellen Street. I'm in fact here right now. I think you can actually see, because I'm sharing my screen as part of my camera right now, one of the figures from the Heritage Impact Assessment. This was the first time I had seen a rendering of this building by the developers in situ with the surrounding buildings. I'm not sure how accurately it portrays the 0.8 meter setback from the sidewalk, but it portrays quite accurately the height of it compared to the surrounding buildings. And it is massive. I think we would all agree that if it were a 100-story building, we would say it is too tall. And so there is some height at which we say this does not fit in the streetscape. This does not fit with the surrounding buildings. This does not fit with the environment. And I would say that this 19-story or 19-story plus building does not fit. I think a shorter building would fit. I think a shorter building would be a wonderful idea. I think we need more housing in downtown. I think we need more high density housing in downtown. I fully support that. I would like to see buildings built that grow with the community. This building is set to be 1-bedroom apartments, which means that the people who would move into it would need to leave if they wish to have a family. I know of design guidelines that I have lived in and lived by in the times that I've been lucky enough to work in Europe, where you design the building to be 2-bedroom units with the anticipation that somebody will buy a subsequent or a adjoining unit, put a door into the wall and turn it into a 3 or 4-bedroom unit, or a 3-bedroom unit and a 1-bedroom unit. I think there's intelligent, good ways to build a building here that will add to the city and will add to the neighborhood. I don't think this building is it. I think it is too tall. I think it is going to overwhelm the surrounding old houses and the surrounding churches and the neighborhood. I think there's a way to gracefully move from the Heritage District on the east side of Weber Street to downtown on the west side of Weber Street. And I hope that Heritage Kitchener and Planning Department and everybody involved will help with that elegant, thoughtful transition and thereby add to the neighborhood and the city. As I said, I'm no expert on all of this. I'm just a concerned citizen, so I don't have that much to say, and I will stop at this point since I know we have a lot of others to speak.
Thank you very much to Andrew. To the committee, if there are any questions for Andrew. Martin.
I'm sorry, I was slow to unmute myself. So you mentioned that you're saying this is as a 19-story building, you don't feel like it fits with the with broadly the neighborhood and the types of buildings there. I mean, I just for full disclosure, I myself, I live in a similar sized building. It's on Church Street, so there are a lot of you mentioned churches as well. There are a lot of churches in that neighborhood, hence the name. And my question is ultimately, because you had said that we do need more density downtown, but not in this particular area. And you also kind of talked about the fit. Would you be able, I have maybe two questions, and maybe just you can answer one just for time, but one would be is, what criteria would you use to determine whether or not a taller building like this proposed development and like the building that I live in, which is kind of blended in with many much smaller buildings, lodging homes, single detached homes, and other apartment buildings and such. What kind of criteria would you use to determine whether or not it fits or not? Like, what is the standard by which you're looking for there? And my other question, alternative question is, since you are saying that we do need more high density in downtown, would you propose in particular, do you feel like there are any other areas in downtown that that the density should go instead of this particular area? Are there any underhoused areas perhaps that you would point to as
certainly,
obviously not for this particular development, but
yeah, you can't just pick and place. So like I said, I'm no expert, so I don't have a hard and fast definition, and I certainly don't know what heritage or city planners use, but this building is 0.8 meters, about yay far from the sidewalk. This building is a driveway width from the building next to it. This building is maybe a little bit more than a driveway's width or a little bit less. I can't quite recall from the building on the other side of it. This building is taking up a lot of the lot. This building is very close to the nearby buildings. To my understanding, there's a roughly 45-degree line that you draw from the adjoining buildings. And if you run that up, I believe you get about 8 stories. The city has a guideline, which I believe is about 8 stories. What is my standard? Well, I had been searching for an image like this since I first heard of this development, and nobody seemed to have one. And as soon as this heritage impact assessment came out with it, this is my standard. That looks enormous compared to the surrounding buildings. If you look at those apartments, which are just outside in white there, which are just outside my window, they are on a larger lot. They are not a stone's throw from the street. They are not a stone's throw from the surrounding buildings. They are situated on a site which is large enough for them. And the other apartment buildings, which you can see in the background, which aren't quite accurately placed, likewise are on larger lots and are not so massive and so close to surrounding houses. In terms of answering your second question, where do I think would be a good place to put more density? I am thrilled to hear that they are putting housing on Queen Street. and that they're connecting into the parking garage on Benton. I think that's a brilliant idea. I like the tall building in downtown proper that's going up on whatever it is, Duke and Frederick. Where would I like to see buildings? Just outside my front door is where they were going to put the Margaret Ave development, which I think was about 8 stories tall. I would have loved to see that there, and I hope that they start building it again. I've seen studies that point out that low-rise 4-story to 8-story buildings give you better environmental impacts, better social impacts for your society, for your neighborhood, for your city. They take less energy to build and maintain. They have better quality of life. I would love to see more of that. I would love to see that everywhere in this city. It would make for a very European, very walkable city. There's my non-expert answers, Martin.
Oh, thank you. And I appreciate your responses, particularly your support for that that other development. And you know, I agree that kind of mid-size is very important and very needed. I also believe that sometimes taller buildings are also needed.
Definitely, yeah,
to allow a lot of people to be in the downtown. But thank you for your response.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions for Andrew from the committee? All right, seeing none, thank you very much to Andrew. And we will move on to our next delegate, who is Roy Cameron. We'll give Sarah a moment to transfer everyone over. All right, welcome, Roy. So you will also have 5 minutes.
Okay, thanks so much for the opportunity to speak here, and thanks so much for the work you do. Basically, what I have to say is pretty simple, and that is that I think as I look at the future and say what kind of built environment would serve future generations well, I think that preserving a heritage district would be high on the list. So as there are more and more large buildings downtown, people are going to want to be in outdoor spaces that are restorative in some basic sense. And I think an intact heritage district would be a community asset. I think that the citizens of this area really have a covenant with the city, given that we are a designated heritage district. So we gladly, I think, I would say for myself and many, live with restrictions on what we can do with our houses. There are extra steps we have to go through if we are making permissible renovations. And I think we need the city to be an equal partner in that. And from my point of view, what's really important is that we've created a plan that's designed by professionals with citizen input to preserve a heritage district. And what I would ask is that we follow those guidelines rather than making ad hoc decisions that set precedents that basically say the guidelines don't count for anything. And the whole point of this is to preserve an intact heritage district that I think will have a lot of value to future generations. That's really my plea.
Great, thank you very much, Roy. To the committee, any questions for Roy? All right, Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, thank you, Roy. Just so what do you be fitting along Weber Street in that area?
I think that a building that meets the guidelines would make sense. And I understand that that's something that could be in the range of 8 stories. I'm all in favor of infill. I just think that this building so imposes on the street and on the buildings adjacent and on the houses behind that it would just not fit at all. I think it would really be detrimental.
Okay, the previous delegation talked about this 45-degree angle and the setback from the front street. What are your thoughts on those two issues?
Well, I agree. I mean, I think the heritage guidelines, as I understand it, use eaves of adjacent buildings as a reference point. I think that's reasonable. I think the setback should not obscure the street view. I mean, if you're walking down the street or driving down the street, and this building is right out essentially at the sidewalk, that really substantially, in my mind, disrupts the streetscape in important ways.
Okay.
And again, I would say that I'm not against infill at all, and I'm not against tall buildings. My house actually abuts 2 towers, but they are on a large lot, and they're set back in ways that, in my mind, don't disrupt the neighborhood the way this building would.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Other questions for Roy? All right, seeing none, thank you to Roy. And we'll move on to our last delegation, which is Bob Martindale of Martindale Planning. And we'll again give Sarah a moment to switch everyone over. All right, so Bob, you also will have 5 minutes, and I see that Sarah has shared your slides as well.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Bob Martindale. Just to introduce myself, I'm principal of Martindale Planning Services, a land use planning firm based in Ajax that specializes in heritage planning. I've had over 20 years of experience as a professional heritage planner, and before that, many years of volunteer experience as a member and chair of Heritage Ajax. I also live in a heritage conservation district and own a property designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. I was retained by the Friends of Old Berlin Town last year in order to assist the group in their evaluation and response to the proposed development at 22 Weber Street. I'll try to be as concise as possible, recognizing the time limit. The first slide, please. Okay, so this slide shows a rendering of the proposed 19-story building at 22 Weber Street West, alongside an excerpt from the Civic Center Heritage Conservation District Plan, which explains the purpose of the plan, which is to establish a framework by which the heritage attributes of the neighborhood can be protected, managed, and enhanced as the community evolves and changes over time. In my presentation, I intend to demonstrate how the proposed development, on the contrary, will not protect, manage, or enhance these heritage attributes that give the district its unique character. Next slide, please. This slide shows the proposed building in the context of the Weber Street streetscape. Going from left to right, it includes the former Zion United Church, number 28 Weber, a 2.5-story dwelling, the proposed building, number 18 Weber, also a 2.5-story dwelling, and St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church on the far right. It dramatizes the difference in height, built form, setback, massing, and building material between the proposed building and its neighbors in violation of District Policy 333A. Next slide, please. This slide, derived from an aerial photograph, shows the relative setbacks of the proposed building and the adjacent buildings at 28 and 18 Weber. Note that 22 Weber would have almost no setback, while the median setback along Weber Street West is 5 meters, and the existing setback for 22 is 7.4 meters. Again, an illustration that the proposed building, in my opinion, is not compatible with its neighbors in terms of setback, notwithstanding the site-specific Weber Street policy, which mandates compatibility with neighbors. Next slide, please. This slide shows the rendering of 22 Weber, again, in the context of the streetscape between Queen and Yonge, and emphasizes the non-compatibility of the proposed building with adjacent development with respect to height, massing, build form, and materials. This is not in keeping with site-specific Weber Street Policy 3352D. Next slide, please. This slide is taken from the applicant shadow study and shows that the March 21st and September 21st shadows will adversely affect several properties on the south side of Roy Street in terms of access to sunlight at 10 o'clock in the morning, noon, 2 o'clock p.m., and 4 o'clock p.m., and even the north side of Roy Street at 4:00 p.m. This is contrary to site-specific Weber Street Policy 3352E. Next slide, please. This slide is based on an air photo of the streetscape and shows the wide discrepancy between the existing setbacks to the east and west of 22 Weber and the setback of the proposed building, notwithstanding site area specific design guideline 694 bullet number 2, which states that setbacks of new development should be aligned with the building that is a setback most similar to the predominant setback on the street. Again, note the 0.8 meter setback proposed for 22 Weber in contrast to the median setback for Weber Street West of 5 meters. Next slide, please. This slide shows a rendering of the proposed building in the context of site area specific design guideline 694 bullet number 6, which states that any new buildings taller than 3 to 4 stories should incorporate some form of height transition or set step backs to minimize the perception of height and shadow impacts to pedestrians on the street and to provide more visual continuity. While the policy requires a minimum step back of 2 meters to provide for usable outdoor terraces for upper levels, the applicant's proposal shows a minimal step back at the second floor, but above this, the elevation returns to the ground floor plane, thereby negating the intent of the policy. Next. The last slide shows 2 ways of applying the 45-degree angular plane requirement for the proposed building. Site area specific design guideline 694 bullet number 7 requires that for buildings taller than 5 stories abutting a residential property to the rear, a 45-degree angular plane is to be provided where feasible, starting from the rear property line to minimize adverse visual impacts on adjacent property owners. In this case, the applicant's heritage impact assessment shows the angular plane starting at the front property line of the lots on the north side of Roy Street, rather than the policy requirement of starting at the rear lot line of the subject property, which would allow for a 19-story building rather than a 5-story building as stipulated by this design guideline. Next.
Thanks, Bob.
I'll
I'll let you conclude.
Quick conclusion, yeah. In conclusion, I'm of the opinion that the proposed zoning and development of 22 Weber Street West are not consistent with the policies and guidelines of the Civic Center Heritage Conservation District Plan. Thank you for your time, and I'd be pleased to answer any questions you may have.
All right, thanks, Bob. From the committee, any questions for Bob? Jean.
Thank you. Through the chair to Mr. Martindale. In your overview, your comments and report, you make reference to PPS, which I understand, Provincial Policy Statement. Could you elaborate what exactly is the link between a provincial policy statement and a heritage conservation district?
Certainly. The provincial policy statement is an overriding set of policies that is meant to pertain to all development in Ontario. And it's intended to be implemented by various planning tools such as official plan policies, zoning bylaws, and so on. Basically, every development that's been proposed since the PPS came out is expected to abide by the policies outlined in the PPS.
If I may, and I haven't seen it recently, but is there not a policy in like 2.6.1 or 2 or 3, which says shall have regards for the heritage structure or item that you're talking about?
Yes, the PPS in that particular section is directed more to preserving the preservation of existing heritage buildings. I think it's possibly a bit lacking in not speaking directly to the situation of vacant lots that are surrounded by heritage buildings. but it certainly can be read into that quite easily. I don't have the PPS in front of me for the exact wording, but it certainly puts the onus on developers and municipalities to ensure that heritage resources are protected when it comes to consideration of new development.
And further, you made a comment about density and that there wasn't license for density. I'm sorry. I really appreciated that statement, and I wondered if you could, I think you said, clarifies the need to adhere to legislation and not the intent to maximize intensification at the expense of heritage.
Mm-hmm.
I did pick that from your overview, and do you wish to elaborate on that?
I think what I was alluding to there was that intensification, as you know, is a very important planning principle that pertains especially to urban centers. But the point of intensification is not to override the principle of heritage conservation. So I think intensification is certainly a very important feature of secondary plans outside of heritage conservation districts. But when you're in a heritage conservation district, I think an equally important principle is to conserve the heritage resources, even if the intensification that one might propose is not as much as, say, could be possible outside a heritage conservation district.
Right. And one final question. The heritage conservation districts are passed by council by a bylaw. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Right. So this is a bylaw with, yes, it talks about guidelines and interesting things, but it is a bylaw, just like we have other city bylaws. I believe I'm correct in that.
Yes, it's the equivalent status, as far as I'm concerned, of official plan policies and zoning requirements.
Thank you.
All right, I see a couple of hands up. Ilona, I saw your hand moments before Jordan, so I'll pass the floor to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Bob, for your detailed presentation. I really appreciate you going through the different points of our Heritage District Plan for the Civic Center. I did have a question in regards to the priority that the Heritage District Plan takes over other bylaws or laws that have been put in place, such as the secondary plan. How does that work? Which takes priority in this situation?
In the case of a Heritage Conservation District plan, I believe the policies in the plan take priority over other official plan policies or zoning regulations when it comes to the details of the development within the HCD.
And would any other legislation be included? Like, would there be any other legislation that is considered or any other planning documents that might be used? I'm thinking of maybe this study that was done in preparation for developing our Heritage District Plan. Since that is just a study, would that play any role in the planning for this?
Yeah, the study which precedes a Heritage District Plan being enacted is a very useful background document and provides considerable detail on the history and evolving development of an area, but it doesn't have the same status as the plan itself. The plan's policies take precedence over any statements made in the district study.
Okay, thank you. I have another question, and that relates to the Weber streetscape. So we did talk, you mentioned about the setback and how the setback itself is very shallow compared to the other buildings. The Heritage District Plan, what would be the guidance there in terms of what would be the most appropriate setback for this particular building?
Yes, as I mentioned, the district plan does contain policies that require compatibility of a new development with the surrounding development in various aspects, including height, built form, setbacks, massing material, and other architectural elements. So setback to me is one of the key parameters of establishing compatibility of a new development in the Heritage District.
And would you have examples of what a different setback might look like if we didn't have that 0.8 meter setback? If it was a more appropriate setback, what would the view of the street look like?
Well, are you talking about the view from down the street and
Yes.
each direction? Yeah.
Yes.
The problem this development creates, of course, is that it cuts off the view from the east or west because it's so close to the street that you can't see anything beyond it. So the intent of the district plan, I believe, was to make sure that setbacks of new buildings respect existing setbacks and therefore don't deprive the view of the street by blocking the view from one angle or the other.
And this would have a significant impact on the streetscape, obviously. And given that this is these are some of the oldest buildings in our district, this would have a significant impact on this particular streetscape. Is that correct?
I believe it would, yes.
Yeah. Okay. The other question that I had was in regards to the transition. So the building backs onto Roy Street, and they do talk about the shadowing that happens on the street. What would you consider to be an appropriate transition, given your professional opinion?
Yeah, I have a concept. I have a problem with the concept of existing low-rise development, principally in the form of single-family dwellings, transitioning all of a sudden. It's not really a transition, but going to a 19-story building on the adjacent lot. So I think the intent of the district plan is to provide for some degree of transition and height, not to go from, say, 2 or 2.5 stories up to 19 stories with the next lot over.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right, thanks, Ilona. Jordan.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, my questions were more or less handled by the last speaker, which is great. However, I did have one question I was hoping Mr. Martindale could elaborate on. Part of some of the issues with some of the delegates and some of the background material presented to the committee was about this 45-degree plane and how that fits within that. I was hoping that Mr. Martindale could elaborate on that and how it's interpreted between the plan versus the study, because there are a few different ways of thinking about it.
Yes, thanks for the question. The plan, and I'm talking specifically about the design guideline that showed in one of my slides, states that any buildings taller than 5 stories are to be constructed with a 45-degree angular plane where feasible. And this plane should start from the rear property line. So if you apply that to this situation, that would allow a 5 or 6 story building, depending on which side of the building you're looking at, possibly going up to 7 to 9 stories. But the applicant's heritage impact assessment started the angular plane at the front of the lots, the front lot line of the lots on the north side of Roy Street. So that allows a 19-story building, interesting enough. And I think there's a huge discrepancy here, and that the city ought to follow its design guideline where it defines the angular plane starting at the rear property line.
Thank you. And just to your interpretation of that is connected to with what some of the answers were in the previous kind of back and forth, where the plan supersedes the study in terms of interpreting that 45-degree angle and where it begins. Is that more or less correct?
I believe it does, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jordan. Other questions for Bob from our committee? All right, seeing none, thank you very much to Bob for your presentation as well as answering our many questions.
Thanks for your time.
All right, so now I will open this up to discussion. As it's a heritage impact assessment, there is no motion required, so staff are seeking feedback from committee on this matter. And I'll just remind everyone as well that the both Dan Curry as well as Jennifer Meter and Turkstra Maza, who are from MHBC Planning on behalf of the applicant, are also here to respond to any questions that you may have. So I will open the floor. Ilona.
Yes, I have a question for Dan Curry. I'm wondering how the angular plane analysis, why it is interpreted the way that it is in the report. I'm having difficulty understanding how it was decided that the origin would be on the opposite side of the street, on the south side of Roy Street.
Sure, thank you. And through the chair. Principally two reasons. One is that's how the angular plane has been interpreted on previous applications similar to this. So in particular, one that's further west on Weber Street. That HIA was considered by the committee and approved using the angular plane on the south side, north side of Roy Street. And the rationale is the same, I think, in both cases, which is that the intent of that angular plane is to minimize impacts on low-rise residential uses. And the properties that abut the rear on the south side of Roy Street are office conversion rather, and are not considered low-rise residential. So that's why it's taken from the other side of the street.
So I have a question. I mean, it might be, even if it is considered to be office conversion, there are people living in those buildings. I mean, we have received letters from numerous people who are living on the south side or the north side of south side of Roy Street. So I'm not understanding how that can be considered to be office conversion when there are actually people living in those buildings.
Through you, through the chair, really the rationale is based on what the planned land use is for those buildings. Some of them are occupied by residential, some are not.
Well, two of the properties backing right on are actually residential, and there's letters that have been written by people who live in those buildings.
Through you, Mr. Chair, through you, Madam Chair. I just introduce myself. I am counsel for the applicant in this on this proceeding. As you know, the matter has been referred to the Ontario Land Tribunal. So this is a bit of an unusual circumstance to be before a public committee while an appeal is ongoing. So I'm just going to step in and just suggest to you respectfully that Mr. Curry has responded to the question, and I think you have his planning opinion, and I think that's the extent to which I would like him to respond. Thank you.
Thank you. Ilona, do you have other questions for?
Not for now, thank you.
All right. So I have Peter and then Donnie for the floor. So Peter, I'll pass it to you first.
Thank you. For a project like this, before typically, I think there has been a component of public consultation. Has there been any public consultation in this project between the developer and the neighbors. I'm not quite sure if this question is for staff and the proponent. I guess it's for both.
Garrett, are you
Yes.
rising to answer that? All right, I'll pass.
Yes,
it to
thank you,
then.
Chair. I can confirm that we did have a neighborhood meeting where we were provided information on the development application that we had received at the time that was before the LPAT. And there is plans to have a neighborhood meeting this Thursday where we will share additional information about the revised materials and provide information about OLT proceedings. So we have had one neighborhood information meeting and there is another one planned for this week.
Thank you.
Thanks. Donnie. Donnie, you seem to have a mute that is not through Zoom.
Sorry.
Perfect.
Is that better?
That is better, yeah.
Sorry, thank you, Chair. This is a question directed to staff. So with the Civic Center Heritage Plan, it stipulates with new buildings that the setback has to be with adjacent to the other buildings surrounding it, or if there isn't a uniform one, that it has to be to one that's a similar building. Has anyone not followed this guideline before for the Civic Center area? And if there is there any examples?
Garrett or Deeksha?
Yes, maybe I can speak a little bit to that, and maybe I should preface by saying, and Ms. Meter has sort of indicated this as well. We're trying to refrain from providing any planning opinion or any opinion from staff, and I think the applicant recognizes the same constraint. What we're looking to do today is to get Heritage, Kitchener Heritage's impact or comments as we continue to revise our issues list, as that is the challenge in front of us before the next case management conference. So really the goal today is to create some awareness about this application, follow as much as we would our normal process, but I would respectfully ask if you could indulge us that we don't provide an opinion necessarily right now, but that we'll continue to hear your comments and your thoughts so that we can refine that issues list so we can ensure that the planning evidence that will be provided on these issues will be through the proper process, which is the exchange of witness statements and document books as part of those OLT proceedings. So I do recognize it's a little bit of an unusual circumstance today.
Great, thanks, Garrett. I think that's helpful context for our discussion as well here. Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, thank you. So it sounds like there, and I'm going to go down the planning road for a moment. It sounds like there are a number of issues that aren't consistent with the Heritage District Plan. Everything from the height, the setback, to the compatibility, to this angular plane thing. So can we ask that this be sent back to the proponent and that these issues be addressed? Like, do we have the ability to do that at this stage, or what? We're not voting on it, I realize that, but can we expect that to happen?
So Chair Sam, maybe I could address that one as well. I think that you can share your concerns, your comments. You certainly, staff are here to hear that. The applicant is here. What they will do with that information is up to them. There is no decision to be made because the decision will be made by the Ontario Land Tribunal. But what Deeksha and I are hearing is some of the areas of concern that Heritage Kitchener either is asking additional information on or thinks that needs to be an important issue that is considered as part of the hearing, and we'll endeavor to ensure that that is included in the issues list.
But we can't, as a Heritage Kitchener, can we say that we would like these issues to be responded to and brought back to us?
So the course of action,
right? I mean, maybe if the OLT outcome might resolve all this for us, but do we have any power here?
so what we're looking for today is Heritage Kitchener's advice on issues that we need to make sure are part of the OLT proceedings. So if there are issues stemming from a heritage perspective, there are also issues from a urban design, from a land use planning. We are refining that list, and that will be the outline of all of the issues. And when I say issues, I don't mean problems. I mean issues as in these are the topics that will be discussed as part of the hearing. So the decision lies totally with the OLT. What we're looking for today is your advice on those areas as we refine that issues list.
So just one last question. So what you're asking us to say is, okay, we would like the developer we would like to question the height. We would, rather than 19 stories, we would like to see so many stories. And we think that the setback is not adequate, and we would like it to be set at such and such a setback. Is that the sort of thing that you're looking for from us?
Yes, and in those two examples, we will endeavor to make sure that the building height and the setback for Weber Street are issues that will be discussed as part of the hearing. So that's exactly what we're here to do today.
Okay. Are there other issues that committee members would like to bring up? Jean, I see your hand.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you, Chair. Just to be clear, through the chair to Garrett, I just really didn't understand why this proposal, this assessment, HIA, was before our committee. So, Garrett, I would appreciate your straight answer as to why this is before the committee.
Through you, Madam Chair, this is before the committee to get your advice and your comments so that we can confirm our issues list. We had a third case management conference where the new development proposal that was discussed. The original application was for 15 stories. We knew that there was a 19-story. As a result of the agreement of the parties at that case management conference, staff were directed to take the revised development proposal and get advice and inform the public in our typical way, which would include coming to Heritage Kitchener as well as holding a neighborhood meeting. So we are exercising our typical process, although I do recognize the final decision would be made by the OLT, which is unusual.
Thank you. I would just like to follow up. So I need to raise this concern, which I've had for a year now. The fact that our committee offers comments, but in my opinion, I have not observed that the opinions of the committee have been really conveyed or taken seriously in a document. And, you know, it seems to me in my past experience that either you direct staff and you have it in the minutes, or you pass a motion and that gets carried and it's considered fully. So I'm just sitting here thinking, Garrett, we can give you and we can give staff direction and all this, but how are we going to be guaranteed that you and your planning department will pick up this and regard it seriously? Because to divert a bit, what I have heard today and the Friends consultant, that there are numerous issues that do not fit the Heritage Conservation District bylaw. And the planning consultant for the Friends did point out the legal and the planning structures that give credence to these things. So, Garrett, I'm wondering how we get this on the books. How are our comments going to be taken seriously?
So we value the advice and the direction that's provided by Heritage Kitchener. Certainly, if there is an example or there's a scenario, I'm happy to talk with you offline. If there's a different way that we can work together, we'd certainly be interested in having that conversation. Today is somewhat unusual. This particular Heritage Impact Assessment, we cannot provide you our opinions as part of this public meeting because that will be done through the OLT proceedings. So we have made the effort to be here this evening or this afternoon to hear your comments and your suggestions that we will then put into our issues list. And ultimately, we will form planning and heritage opinions around all of these issues that will be in the document books and within our witness statements.
Great. Thank you. I will have further comment, Chair Hasek, later.
All right, thanks, Jane. Jordan, I see your hand is raised.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, it does seem to be a very interesting and unique sort of situation that we're in, but yeah, I guess I would advise if anybody does have any other advisements to make, but I guess this is the forum to make them in. The one that I have connected to reading the documents and reading the background material and listening to the delegates is that for staff, as you follow through with the whole process that we're right in the middle of right now, that I would advise to be very clear about your interpretation of compatibility here between the actual project and how it fits or does not fit within the district plan. I think that that is a key component moving forward, and that there will be multiple interpretations, but that on your end, it should be very clear what the city's interpretation is with it. I think that that is a really important aspect of this, that word compatibility, that it actually means something, and that it means something concrete within how things are laid out in the district plan and what the purpose of the district plan is. So that's what I would advise moving forward.
Great, thanks, Jordan. Other comments from committee? Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, sorry to keep going at this. Is it possible that we as a committee, and maybe with the help of Shad, that we sort of draft a resolution of what we, if we, the points that we agree on that need to be addressed, and so that it's a statement from Heritage Kitchener that would then be taken by staff to hopefully at some point come back to us with a revised proposal or something. I mean, I don't know how this would work, but I don't know if that's something that we might consider this, as a Heritage Kitchener contribution.
Thanks, Councillor Chapman. Garrett, do you want to respond to that in any way?
Yes, I think Deeksha and I each have a running list of what we heard so far. If we could read that back, or if there was someone wanted to give us that list, we're happy to take that.
Great, thanks.
Well,
Peter, sorry, go ahead.
So, I mean, I think it would be good if we could actually see that list so that we could say, okay, yes, we as a committee sign on to this. So not just that you've got the list and Deeksha has the list, but something that we can actually see and that we can say, yes, we'd like to see this as our document.
So we are developing our issues list, and we will be providing opinion on several issues. As I mentioned, more than just heritage, there's urban design, there's transportation, there's land use planning. We have experts that will be providing that opinion, and those opinions are formed by someone's own interpretation of policy, someone's own application of the policies and understanding of different legislative framework. So the evidence that's going to be provided as part of the OLT hearing will be of those experts. And in this case, we are taking notes to help inform that opinion as part of this proceedings for our heritage evidence. So we wouldn't have an urban design direction. I think it is important that our heritage planner, who is going to be providing the expert opinion as part of that hearing, it is an independent professional recommendation. So any resolution of Heritage Kitchener I would recommend, or I would suggest, should be, these are areas of importance for Heritage Kitchener, but you certainly could not direct an opinion of an individual professional.
All right, Peter.
Okay, let me briefly make my contribution to that list. I think that the building is clearly incompatible with the requirements of the Heritage District, and when I say clearly, it's something that is quite apparent just by looking at the presentation of the building. It is incompatible with the Heritage District in its height, in its scale, in its setback from the district, in its contribution to the streetscape, which is minimal. Its use of the ground plane are incompatible with Weber Street. Is essentially a apartment lobby attached to a parking lot, which makes no contribution to the ground plane. In general, it gives nothing back to the public realm, which is a loss. And just briefly, this is such an interesting conflict, this geographic area, the conflict between the density requirements of the downtown overlapping with the demands of the Heritage District. And how do you reconcile those two things? And I think we've seen an example of how you do reconcile those two things, and that is from a development that was before us earlier, which is the development proposed for Weber and Yonge Street, not far away from there. And that was achieved by extensive public consultation over a long period of time. And it's a lot of hard work. The design was developed in sort of a repeated consultation with the public around it. And it seems apparent that this has not happened here. And I think that resultingly, that's the proposal that we see before us. So that's my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Jean, I saw that your hand is raised and you are already unmuted, so you can go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Sam. I do believe that Peter has eloquently highlighted the issues. And I just want to add my support and perhaps say it this way, that it's been clearly identified. Residents have a concern, the delegations, the ACO have a concern with the massing, the size, the built form, the setbacks, the height, the shadow creation, all those things. It's proved that the proposed development is inconsistent with the Civic Center Heritage Conservation District Plan, the regulations, which is a bylaw, and these things, it's expected. I can't emphasize this enough because I know when that plan was being put together, the years of input from the residents that were there, and now we have new residents who feel strongly about the plan, but there was a lot of time and effort on the part of city staff and residents, and probably those owners, they were consulted, owners who participated, the owners that had development potential. It was decided, the plan gives guidance and we expect to follow it. So my thing is, I'm going to stop there, but if we were to have a motion, I'd say, Heritage Kitchener, we must not accept the HIA as provided by MHBC. However, I understand from staff that this motion is not in order, but you're making the list. Again, Peter has made excellent points. I am confirming this, and the plan, what is being provided is not consistent with the district policies. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean. Martin.
Sorry, it's every time. Yeah. So I just wanted to just clarify my initial question to a delegate, and just for the benefit of the committee, as well as respond to one thing that was said. So with my initial question asking about kind of how the delegate kind of viewed the justification for a particular height of building, I do kind of mean in their own sense, and I wanted to kind of just, even for a brief moment, just kind of bring that conversation to that broader question of why, because I do understand that we are looking at a specific set of guidelines, but I think sometimes it's important to take a step back. And in light of that, the reason why I brought it up again is so Peter, you made a comment that this building would provide no benefit to the public realm. So I don't know if that means specifically like from a streetscape point of view, but just that term public realm made me think like that's a broader.
For anybody who doesn't live in the building.
Yes, and well, I would say that those that would live in the building would very much see the benefit of 19 stories compared to 5. That's a lot of housing units. And I would also add, and I think this is maybe isn't emphasized enough, those that are not competing with all of those people that may be housed in a 19-story building for the existing housing. I think that I understand this is a very focused committee, which is important in its own right, but I think that we can't lose sight of the broader picture when we're talking about things like the public realm. We are in a pretty severe housing crisis with affordability, and we have a shortage of housing that can have some pretty severe impacts on the cost of housing. So that's just, I just wanted to put that out there, and just thank everyone for the time. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Martin. Other comments from committee? Ilona.
So I think that we are looking at this from a heritage perspective, and as members of the Heritage Committee, the terms of reference state that we are supposed to be looking at matters involving conservation of heritage resources. And that's the perspective that I'm taking when I'm looking at this. And I have read the HIA that is being presented today for 22 Weber, and I read it in detail. And in my opinion, this HIA is riddled with inconsistencies and misinterpretations of the Heritage District Plan for the Civic Center. And I cannot understand how some of these things can be said with a straight face There are so many inaccuracies in this particular document. They are inconsistent with what is stated in the Heritage District Plan, and inconsistent in a lot of ways with policies that are in place for for the city of Kitchener. I want to let it be known that from my perspective, this is an inappropriate building being proposed. It is incompatible with what is currently in our district and with what the Heritage District Plan. The transition is inappropriate. The setback from the street is inappropriate. The step back in height in the back is inappropriate. It doesn't serve anyone on Roy Street. There's absolutely no setback or step back. The angular plane analysis, the point of origin, it clearly states in the Heritage District Plan where that is supposed to start, and that's the rear property, not the opposite side of the street. And I think that as a whole, we should be thinking of our community not as individual parts and buildings, but rather it should be thought of as a community. And when you start chipping away at the outer edge of it, it begins to erode the entire character. And this might only be the beginning of a slippery slope. This will be precedent setting for our community. We do not have any 19-story buildings. And any buildings that were built previously were built before the Heritage District Plan was developed in 2008. And I feel very strongly that this will have a negative impact on our community. So that's all I have to say.
Great, thank you, Ilona. All right, are there any further comments from members of our committee? Additional issues that you would like to raise for Garrett and Deeksha?
I don't have anything to add, but can we get a copy of that list, maybe distributed to the committee, just so we have sort of a summary of what's being said? It would be very helpful.
I presume at the very least it will be in the minutes. But Garrett, maybe you can comment on where Heritage Committee members might be able to find the list of issues.
Yes, let me connect with Ms. Goldrup after the meeting and we'll figure out the best way to reflect the discussion.
Perfect. Thank you very much. All right. Thanks, everyone. That concludes our discussion item 3.1. So we will move on then to discussion item 3.2, which is also a draft heritage impact assessment. This one is for 234 and 240 Frederick Street, which is a proposed development to construct a 4-story freestanding apartment building. And its number is DSD 2022094. I see Sarah has already moved everyone into the appropriate parts of the Zoom meeting. So thank you, Sarah. And Deeksha is going to provide a brief overview to get us started. Deeksha.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, so the proposed HIA is for 240 Frederick Street, which is listed as a non-designated property of cultural heritage value or interest. It is also adjacent to 230 Frederick Street, which is designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. And both these properties are also within the Central Frederick Neighborhood Cultural Heritage Landscape. The proposed development is to construct a new 5-story freestanding apartment building in the rear lot of 240 Frederick Street. And so at this moment, heritage planning staff are looking to the committee for input. We have the heritage consultants here, Lindsay Benjamin from WSP, and I believe she has a presentation for the committee. So I will hand it off to Lindsay Benjamin. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Deeksha. Right, looks like Sarah's just getting your presentation pulled up. So, Lindsay, I will pass it over to you.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here tonight to present the draft heritage impact assessment for 234 and 240 Frederick Street. And if we can move to the next slide, please. So this report was undertaken to accompany the submission of a site plan and minor variance application being prepared by IBI Group for the subject properties, which will see the retention of both buildings and the construction of a new 4-story freestanding condominium building in the rear of the lot at 240 Frederick Street. So that's the building outlined in yellow. The first draft of this HIA was submitted to the city in March 2021 and revised based on comments and discussions with Heritage Planning staff. Concurrent with this HIA, WSP prepared a cultural heritage conservation protection plan for 240 Frederick Street that provides detailed technical recommendations to mitigate indirect impacts that may result from the proposed development. So from things like land disturbance, construction vibrations, and damage from construction activities. Next slide, please. 234 Frederick Street is designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act, and 240 Frederick Street is included on the city's municipal heritage register as a listed, non-designated property. And it was confirmed to possess designer physical, historical or associative, and contextual value in accordance with Ontario Regulation 906. As both properties are located within the central Frederick neighborhood cultural heritage landscape, the HIA evaluated impacts to the landscape itself, as well as to the adjacent Part 4 designated property located directly across the street at 239 to 241 Frederick Street. Next slide, please. So the proposed development concept consists of the full retention of both buildings and construction of a new 4-story freestanding residential condominium building with 32 residential units of 1- and 2-story apartments. The development is proposed 3 meters from the rear or north elevation of the existing building at 240 Frederick Street. And this increased separation distance represents a refinement from the previous site plan, which included a narrower 1.5 meter setback. And this was adopted as a recommendation of the previous draft of the HIA. The future use of the existing building at 240 Frederick Street is anticipated to be a residential duplex or a triplex. And a Victorian-inspired garden is proposed in the open space between the existing structures. And a portion of the wrought iron fence at 240 Frederick Street is planned to be conserved and repurposed around this garden area. Next slide, please. IBI Group has worked with the City of Kitchener to revise the concept plans to propose a new structure with a reduced height. It was reduced from 5 to 4 stories. That is sympathetic to and distinguishable from the built heritage resources on the subject properties. The building materials such as yellow and brown brick have been incorporated to reflect the construction material of the house at 240 Frederick Street, as well as the surrounding houses in the central Frederick landscape. A flat roof consistent with the adjacent existing mid-rise building just across Gordon Avenue was selected to limit the height of the project and shadowing impacts on the adjacent properties. It also provided space for a green roof and a patio area to provide sustainability benefits, as well as urban amenity space for the residents. Next slide, please. Following consideration of comments provided by planning and heritage planning staff at the City of Kitchener, lighter materials such as glass and gray precast concrete spandrels were integrated into the south and portions of the east and west elevations closest to the heritage buildings to create a neutral background. Also to minimize the perceived mass and provide a contrast between the old and the new structures and a contemporary separation. This was also done in a manner in an attempt not to compete with the architectural detail of the heritage house, which is quite ornate in the Queen Anne style. Next slide, please. The HIA determined that the new residential development would have primarily indirect impacts on the contextual value of both properties and the surrounding landscape. So 3 alternatives were considered to avoid or reduce these adverse impacts. The first was to preserve and maintain the properties with no further development. The second, to develop the properties as proposed. And the third was to explore increasing the separation distance between the properties. So as I mentioned, following submission of a draft of this report to City of Kitchener, the proponent adopted option 3 and refined the previous site plan, which increased the separation distance and further mitigated potential indirect impacts to the existing structure. As option 3 was adopted, the HIA looked at options 1 and 2, and option 2 was found to be the preferred alternative. Although option 1 would result in minimal intervention to the built heritage resources, redevelopment of the property ensures a viable and stable new use that will improve the probability that the site will be utilized and conserved in the long term. Option 2 would involve no direct impacts to 240 Frederick Street aside from the removal of a portion of the wrought iron fence around the periphery of the property, and will not result in direct impacts to the heritage attributes of the surrounding cultural heritage resources. Mitigation measures have been implemented to address indirect impacts to the contextual value of 240 Frederick Street and the surrounding landscape through a sympathetic design concept for the new development. And last slide, please. So as such, the following recommendations were proposed through the HIA. That the detailed technical guidance provided to address indirect impacts in the Cultural Heritage Conservation Protection Plan be considered to protect the heritage attributes of 240 Frederick Street before, during, and after development. That indirect vibration impacts be monitored for 234 Frederick Street, and that the foundations of the new building be kept independent from those of the existing structure at 240 Frederick Street, and that foundation shouldn't be compromised. And lastly, that any portions of the wrought iron fence removed from the south half of the property's periphery be relocated post-construction. And as per the landscape plan, portions of the fence that can't be relocated should be conserved and repurposed in the Victorian garden between the two subject properties. Thank you. That concludes my presentation.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So once again, there's no motion required on this item. Staff are seeking feedback from the committee. So if you have questions for the applicant or for Lindsay on behalf of the applicant, you may ask those. You may also provide comments. So I will open it to the floor. Councillor Chapman just sneaked in before Peter, so I will pass it to Councillor Chapman first.
I beat you. Okay, sorry. Just a quick question. What do we know about the properties adjacent to or sort of surrounding this Frederick Street? These two properties on Clarence. I don't know the area that well, but I think there's Clarence and Gordon. Do we have any information about those properties?
Yeah, so the properties on Gordon Street that are more or less directly adjacent or along the streetscape of this development are primarily, they're fairly consistent 1.5 story kind of Berlin vernacular structures. They seem to be of yellow and brown brick, pretty consistent setbacks and massing. And then along Frederick Street are some larger 2.5 to 2 story, more Queen Anne and arts and crafts style structures. And then right at the intersection of this development at Gordon and Frederick, there's a collection of contemporary buildings or more contemporary buildings. So there's a 3-story kind of mid-rise 1960s or 70s residential building directly adjacent, as well as a 17-story apartment building. And then just to the southeast, there's I think it's a 2.5-story contemporary residence as well.
So are there any other designated or properties with heritage attributes that we should be aware of?
Just directly adjacent at 239 and 241 Frederick Street, there's a designated Part 4 property that I think it's the Pekina House, and that was evaluated in the HIA too, but it wasn't found that there would be any indirect or direct impacts to the structure. It's on the south side of Frederick Street.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
No problem.
Okay, Peter.
Thanks. I just would like to say that we see a lot of HIAs and development proposals in front of us. And I just want to say that what we're seeing here, I think that this work is really exceptional. I think that all the planning staff and the proponents and the design professionals, I think you've done a really, really excellent job. I live in the Central Frederick neighborhood. I know this property really well, and it's I can take a very familiar list that from the last project, right? And I can say that in this project, it is compatible in its height and in its scale and its setbacks, right? How it hits the ground. It's residential at grade. It's give back to the public realm. It's a very interesting building. In its choice to be a background building and not a foreground building. It preserves and sets up the historical buildings on Frederick Street and preserves the great character of the street fully intact. I think it's, I'm very happy to see it. I think it's terrific work. And I would hope that this kind of proposal would be a type of model for future neighborhood, or for future development in this kind of neighborhood. Thanks.
Thanks, Peter. Other questions or comments from committee members? Jean, and you are already unmuted, so you're good to go.
Thank you, Chair. I threw to Lindsay. Lindsay, well, I think Peter made a very good comment about the quality of the report. And I would have to echo his comments about the quality of the report. And it's good to see that things have been worked out so that the new proposal blends in with these two significant properties on Frederick Street. And I do believe that housing will be accommodated. However, housing is not a business, it's the heritage. But now, Lindsay, I have a question, and I think maybe you answered, but maybe you can explain further. The flat roof really bothered me in the sketch that was provided. However, you're saying the green patio and something else, a green roof and a green area and a patio would be provided. What I was bothered by was the bit about the flat roof, because it seemed to me all around everything had been picked up with respect to cladding and so on, except all around we have small peaked roofs. And I wondered if you could maybe elaborate on your deliberations to come up with your end result.
Sure, Jean, I'd be glad to. That's a good question. So the flat roof was primarily selected to limit massing and overshadowing on the nearby property. So if there was a peaked roof, that would increase the height of the building somewhat, which would then cast farther shadows, which primarily fall to the north and to the east. So through the landscape. And then also in terms of creating, the intention was to design the new building that would not necessarily replicate, but take cues from the existing buildings in the neighborhood. So rather than to replicate the peaked roofs, kind of creating a more contemporary building that is legible and of its own time, while taking cues from the existing building stock, the historic building stock. So that was the intention there. And then with the bonus of then creating space for amenity space for the residents and a green roof, which provides a lot of environmental benefits to the site as well.
So you mentioned cues from the older buildings, and in the area, or the, well, I'm thinking of a 240, it strikes me as a yellow brick building, and we have window frames that are brown. Granted, I know you don't want to you want to separate the new from the old, but I'll have to be honest, gray doesn't hit me very nicely at all, whatever the frames of the windows and that. And have you thought about some type of a brown material or beige material for the frames of the windows rather than gray?
Thank you, Jean. Yeah, the building underwent, from my understanding, a great deal of back and forth with city staff and the architects at IBI Group to come up with a design that it was believed ultimately, I think they did look at a brown brick wall at first, but the building, there was a lot of competition almost when looking from Frederick Street at this very ornate painted yellow brick building, and then to have brick and more elements behind it, there was a bit of a competition, and we really wanted the listed heritage building to be the star of the view from Frederick Street. So the more neutral background was ultimately decided upon to provide that transition and a backdrop for the heritage building and all of its heritage attributes. But I don't know if it was specifically looked at to provide some color contrast to the window wells. That's something we can take back to the team too and see if there's an opportunity to reevaluate.
Right. I guess my thing is the window frame or also the steel frame around the window or whatever, that section. I just wondered whether there's consideration for that a little bit. And from my perspective, we're trying to link the old with the new in some way. Okay, and this building, 234, is designated, and I have to say I worked with Linda O'Krafka many years ago to get that Peganaw building or the Forsyth building, the house, designated. So now we're seeing it coming together, and I've looked at 240 Frederick for so many years, and I think we need to designate it. Now I understand that it may come, with the owner and consideration, but there may come a time when those and it's very good to see that all those wooden features, the ornate features and stained glass windows and everything are going to be preserved. But there may come a time when the owner needs to do some work on it. And up until this year, the Waterloo Regional Heritage Foundation has a considerable amount of money for restoration if you need it, but the property has to be designated. So do you think there's an inkling of maybe interest from the owner to, when done, designate this property? What do you think, Lindsay?
Thanks, Jean. I can't speak for the intentions of the owner, but just knowing his reputation and previous projects that we've worked on in the past, he is definitely sympathetic to heritage and I think is kind of a champion for heritage conservation. So I wouldn't be surprised. But again, I can't speak for the developer's intentions.
So you may just pass it along and give it the hint and we'll work from there. I can understand the position when right now you're ready to do your development, but anyway, okay, thank you.
Thanks, Jean. Any further comments or questions on this item? All right, I'm seeing a few shaking of heads, so that will conclude our discussion. So thank you, everyone. And we will move on to our next discussion item, which is our subcommittee updates. And our first subcommittee is the Decolonizing the Heritage Process. And I have an email from Robin. She sends her regrets for the meeting, very busy with the upcoming Women's Day festivities, I suppose, with her work. So she's unable to attend. And it appears that the Decolonizing the Heritage Process Subcommittee was not able to meet in February, but they are looking to meet in March to continue with their work. And Robin mentioned as well that if anyone is interested in participating in any of this work who's not currently involved, that the subcommittee would welcome that help. It is, as she says, very difficult work, so the more hands, the better. So that is the update there. I'm happy to attempt to answer any questions from the subcommittee if anyone has any. All right, we'll move on to our next subcommittee update then, which is designation in the Municipal Heritage Register. And I know that this subcommittee did meet, so Peter, I will pass it to you for the update.
Yes, thank you. The designation subcommittee did meet on the 23rd. And we discussed what the next course of action for the committee is. And I think that sort of the what we talked about was focusing on the list of non-designated buildings of heritage interest, and that the committee has the ability through its efforts to take buildings from that list that are likely candidates and move them towards designation. There's also an opportunity to take buildings which are not on that list and add them to the list and get them on the path to designation, because without inclusion on the list, there is no designation. In order to start that, we have all of the resources of the inventory of those buildings. There's just over 100 properties, and their statement of significance as well. So I think the next step is to go through the list, and the list hasn't been looked at since 2012, so it's 10 years old. And the purpose of going through the list is to see whether the building is still there, see whether the building is or currently designated for demolition under current development plans, see whether the building has been renovated in the interim. Then to try and evaluate the building in terms of its likelihood or for candidacy for designation. And that would be whether it is the participant, whether it has the support of the owner, the support of staff, and the potential support of the political representatives as well. The sort of three gates that you have to get through. So sort of for our next meetings for a while, it's to, the plan is to methodically go through the list. So invitation to any committee members or non-committee members that want to go through the heritage building list. It's a great adventure, and you're welcome to join us at our next meeting.
Great, thanks, Peter. Jean, I see you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I'm unmuted. Thank you. Question to Peter. All right, who has the list, or where is the list?
I actually got the list as part of a package of information for Heritage Committee members from a previous time on the committee. There's one list of buildings of heritage interest, one list of Part 4 designation, and one list of Part 5 designation. You put them all together, I think it's about 1,000 buildings, right? So we're just going to take that one narrow slice and work on that.
If I may, depending on my time, I don't mind getting the list and looking at buildings, but I really think it would be a good exercise, and now the better weather is coming, if by chance any member were to take the list and maybe cycle around the community or drive around the community and have a look at these buildings. And surprisingly, you may find a gem that should be listed or should be moved. And then there's the whole business about talking to owners and the owners of these buildings to get them in the mood for designation. Because we really don't want to say, we don't want to have end up with a letter in the mail and they say, what's this? Oh, what is the city doing to me now? So this dialogue that goes on back and forth with the owners, this is just my comment and advice as we go ahead. So really to get to know your city and neighborhoods and to look at these, it's amazing what you'll find. So thanks, Peter.
Thanks, you.
Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, Peter, maybe if if you don't mind me offering, if anybody's interested in having a copy of the list, maybe you could share it with, you could contact Peter and get that list.
Great. Other questions or comments for Peter about designations and the Municipal Heritage Register? All right, seeing none, thanks to that subcommittee for all your work and your very consistent last Wednesday of the month meetings. All right, so we'll move on to our effects of designation on affordability. Martin, I'll pass it over to you for the update.
Thank you very much, Sam. First of all, my regrets for last month where I wasn't able to make it. And yeah, so, you know, due to a number of different reasons, we haven't been as productive in the last little while as we'd like to be, but we'd like to be, well, I would at least, and I think Jordan agrees that we would like to be much more productive in the coming months. So we're kind of meeting to arrange more kind of scheduled meetings. So I don't have as much of an update for that right now. Otherwise, I had a very good conversation with a with someone with architecture background talking about heritage and affordability, which I found very valuable, and maybe we can kind of bring them into a group as, you know, someone to consult sometimes. And yeah, I'm just very I feel very grateful that we have this committee so we can, you know, very, very clearly talk about the broader impacts of what we're doing, including on affordability. So, and I would also just say that, you know, we are a small committee. Others are still very free to join. It's kind of a research-based committee, but even if, you know, depending on how much time you have to look at articles, it could just be, you know, being there regularly at committees and asking important questions to us, to help guide us, or just kind of providing that kind of different voice, different perspective as we're kind of discussing the material that we're working with. So different levels of engagement would still, I think, be pretty valuable. But of course, it's up to you. But we would welcome anyone, even if it's kind of later on or at a limited capacity. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Martin. All right, and our last subcommittee is promoting cultural heritage, so I will pass it to Jean.
Thank you. So February was Heritage Month, and at our last meeting, the first one in February, we talked about promotion and promoting the heritage conservation districts, the plans, the walking tours that are already available online and on the Kitchener website. So we were fortunate enough to have a plug in the article from Rich Mills, Flash from the Past, with a link to the tour information. There was an article in the Record about it and the districts. And Councillor Michaud, I don't know, I know you did something with Facebook. Maybe you can elaborate.
Sure. I caught the article in the Record, and it was around Family Day, so I posted on the Facebook pages that we have in Ward 4, Dune South, Pioneer Park, and my own, just kind of a mention of heritage and all the heritage districts and the link to the city, and I of course highlighted Ward 4, Upper Dune, and it got some traction. People were really enjoying getting the information, and I directed them to the neat handout sheets or the sheets that they can download from the Record, from the city website, and print off and walk around specifically Upper Dune and see all the, I think there was 22 spots. Jean, you and I walked it, I'm pretty sure, my first year in term as council, and Jean took me through the whole thing. So it's quite a fascinating walk, and I think there were some people that did it and really enjoyed it, so it worked out well.
And if I may, I also noticed that some people, they weren't walking, but they drove very slowly along the road. And I could tell that they were reading the script that you would find.
That's great.
So that was good. And
Good.
then Garrett, I think you mentioned, I'm not too sure how this all came about, maybe the city's communications department in conjunction, we tried to highlight Family Day and Heritage Day together. Family Day with respect to the city's website and how I'm not too sure what the communications department did, but I know you mentioned they did something. So Garrett, if you're there, maybe you could tell us what they did.
Yes, through you, Chair. So Jean, you and I had worked on establishing which tours to highlight, and then I provided that, and Sean was able to do a media release of all of the Family Day activities and included that. And we are very pleased to see that the record picked that up and highlighted it. So yeah, it was a good news story. It's nice to see that people were, Councillor Michaud, that people were seeing it on social media and picking it up, and you're witnessing people enjoying the tour. So that's great.
Yeah, I think this is really important. It kind of underscores the importance of social media and getting all this information out there. And to be honest, I didn't even know about that sheet on our website, shamefully, in the district. So when I looked at it, I was really impressed and thought, there's a lot of people that probably don't know that it's there. So we'll just keep, putting stuff out there in social media and however we can amplify the great districts that we have in this city.
So it's always worthwhile to keep bringing the material that's there in a new setting, new context. So that's my report for this go. And now we're into March. So maybe it's back to the next section of our work. Well, I guess it has to be.
Thanks, Jean. Questions for the Promoting Cultural Heritage Subcommittee? I think I may have forgotten to ask if there were questions for designation on affordability. So if you have questions about any of the subcommittees, please do feel free to ask them. All right, I see that others are also feeling it be 6 o'clock in the evening. So we will move on then to our status updates, and I will ask if either Diksha or Garrett have any status updates for us on heritage best practices, our 2022 priorities, any heritage impact assessment follow-ups that you may have.
Through the chair, we don't have any status updates at this point.
Okay, great. Thank you. And information items, we have, of course, our heritage permit application tracking sheet, which is at the end of our agenda packages for everyone's information. Any additional information items from staff?
To the chair, no, not at this moment.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Diksha. All right. Well, against all expectations, I think we are going to adjourn our meeting a few minutes early. So thank you all so much for being here this evening, and we will see you at the beginning of